Greetings ladies and mental gents, and welcome to my channel, where I like to make audio narrations of various stories from across the internet. In this series we'll be focusing on the web novel, There Is No Epic Lucha, Only Puns. And in this video we'll be doing chapter 28 to 30. I hope that you enjoy. There Is No Epic Lucha, Only Puns, chapter 28, Guilty Roots. Delta dreamed of microwaves. The machine dinged and Delta snorted, awake in alarm. With a moment dedicated to remembering who she was, Delta blinked a few times. She felt odd as she stood up, and it took a moment for her to remember why she had fallen asleep. Sleep. It had been something that she hadn't done since, before the demon child. It had been a while since she had thought of that being. Delta yawned and grumbled as she scratched her back. Her first tunnel twinkled into the lumen mushrooms. It was bright, so that she guessed for a normal people it was only a low level of visibility. She felt lopsided, as if something extra had been attached to her left hip. It took her some effort, as she walked, did not turn and tumble. The extra her had weight to it like a twin that had been attached to her body, but Delta found none of the emotional attachment. She stretched her awareness and immediately pulled it back in alarm. Delta had never known how to view her floor in its entirety, but now she knew, and it made her mind spin and stumble. It was just up and down that she felt, but down and round and up and away. And her true self, the core, felt odd. Delta rushed to the core room, only to see the staircase into the core room, and not orb. Hesitant, she moved towards the stairs and felt her vision blur as the space lunged forward. Her sight clearly grew on the new space, her core now relocated in some new area. The second floor. This was her second floor. Delta gasped as she stumbled. Her knees hit hard as she felt the new space. It was unknownness, hit her like a hammer. Delta had never been this low or this deep, and the new challenge, it was new opportunity. It was scary. Delta gasped as she tried to stretch her awareness out, and only to have the feeling bounce back after a single room. Delta climbed to her feet. She had bought this. Delta had wanted a second floor. Why? Her confuddled mind demanded answers, and Delta could only rub her eyes in response to the empty question in her rose. Delta inhaled and looked around the lone core room. She had wanted this to expand her options. Delta wanted this because it was good for... What were the names? Gris and Cully? No, that wasn't right. Rudy, yes. The woman who made Delta feel like she had friends. Delta took a moment to go over everything. She had come from... Earth? Earth. And she had been born in a cellar. Dungeon? Dungeon felt right, and she shook a few moments forward and felt stronger as she kept stretching her awareness. She was Delta, and she wanted to be... good to humans. This rang true, and Delta felt her headache ebb away as the memories returned. She was a human, and she did not want to kill. This hit her so strongly that Delta almost fell to her knees again. Once she felt strong enough, she stood on her own two legs. There was a second floor, and it felt like a tiny dark spot on her mind. So empty, so unreal. Delta knew that she had so much more space to do with Tremble. She forced herself to return to the first floor. The influx of information was almost overwhelming, and Delta stumbled again. Hear me. Can you hear me, Dungeon Core Delta? The familiar ringing, Delta grabbed onto it with everything that she had. It was so exhausting to think, so hard to remember. Delta grabbed the blue light and it flashed. Restoring mental stability, 50%, 80%, 100%. I am sorry. I seem to have unwillingly taken your personal numbers into myself upon the creation of a new floor. Are you feeling well? No? Where am I? Delta rasped at the menu before he dinged. The first floor. I relocated you here when not all connections reached satisfactory results. Forgive me if I upset you. The words were empty as words, but it could be that Delta sniffed as she felt the concern emanated from the simple screen. She stood and felt power return to her body. I couldn't remember who I was, and I couldn't remember you, or the gobs, or people. Delta wiped furiously her nose, knew was quiet for a moment. Creating a second floor may have added stress to your good nature. I am taking the data in now, and I promise, I swear, I will retain your I will protect you, Delta. The words seemed to change like bad static, as new seemed to force some words to change sizes. It's okay. We're here and I feel okay. I think I'm going to be okay. Delta took a deep breath to calm herself. My word is my life. Sadly, you do not have access to an avatar yet. I am sorry. I know you really wanted one to communicate with the guests, and it will look hard into the next floor as best as I can for you. Delta sniffed back the tears as everything came rushing back. She felt happy to remember who she was. She felt sad to not have a working form. Delta felt happy to have new. It all mixed together, and Delta sobbed as she tried to hug the screen. She felt some warmth before she opened her eyes to see empty air. Please do not cry. I do not and I'm not equipped to deal with it. I am not equipped to deal with it. I am not equipped to deal with it. I am a menu. I am not equipped to deal with it. I wish I was. Delta watched the menu faded away for a moment. She grabbed at the air where it was in futility. No, come back. I didn't mean to upset you. Delta whispered. She tried a few more times to summon him, but only got the basic menu. After a few moments of silence and fear, New appeared. I'm sorry. Can we focus on what needs to be done? I wish to stay with you longer, and you can only see work as possible option. Of course. What? New, tell me, what does the second floor grant me? Delta tried to order as best as she could without her voice shaking. Everything was moving too fast and Delta felt scared. Her first floor had never scared her. It had always just been joy to improve. But to feel this, it made Delta afraid of looking too closely. Delta was no dungeon at heart. Normal dungeons would take this change with ease, but Delta struggled to even focus on it. The second floor of this first goal of many new dungeons. This floor grants you the choices of new monsters and a new theme selection. Please choose before we continue. Monster selection for the second floor. Skeletons, burning ember spirits, frog tribesmen. Theme selection DP gained to allow the core to get a start on the second floor. Heat caves 10 DP. Flooded mines 10 DP. Jungle floor 50% bonus due to previous floor 15 DP. Delta blinked and reread the list. Several things jumped out of her. First, the idea of having burning anything near a jungle floor or a flooded floor was just silly. It was basically asking for a handicap. Having skeletons in water sounded like a good idea, but Delta closed her eyes and the slimers appeared. Undead scared Delta silly, even by proxy. The empty gazes and the bare bones, the human noises. So she decided to select the frog people and the jungle theme by process of elimination. Sure, Delta could make frog people work underwater, but she felt a little attraction towards the jungle theme due to one thing. Her plant purchases would surely grow well on this level. Delta felt more herself as she made the illogical choice and picked the frog people and the jungle theme. Her core room flashed from a normal soil to a wooden boards changed to a leafy root color, and each corner gained an odd tree. Its roots formed the floor and its branches stretched across the ceiling as it grew rapidly. Smaller trees and dense thickets making up the walls of the room. A fog spread around her and she could not quite see through it. But there was a feeling of distance there in the luminous stones in the now very high cavern ceiling glowed with an almost looked like sunlight. Delta gasped as the heat rose by several degrees and a thinner, wispy mist formed over the floor of the room. Delta wiped her forehead as she felt her heat get to her. It was still good to feel something other than awareness and dirt. Delta bent down and examined the roots making up the floor on the room, and they looked sturdy beyond reason, and looking up, the ceiling looked very far away indeed. It made her feel so very big in her mind. It's some unknown part of herself had awakened. The mist, the trees, a benefit of buying this theme. Would the flooded mines have deep yawning chasms? Would the heated caves leak lava? Delta felt like she had purchased the right thing, and with excitement opened the menu. I'm glad that you are okay. Let me show you the gains of this floor purchase. There are quite a few. Basic frog tribesman, a simple frog monster with basic intelligence. It can leap and ambush foes with ease in the misty forest. 15 mana. Mist, a highly humid air. It makes things hard to see and is able to lure people into non-lethal traps. Jungle bee. These are simple-minded gatherers of pollen, and more plants and flowers on the floor, the more naturally these bees workers will grow in numbers and efficiency. The stinger may apply a paralytic poison. It will not kill 13 mana. Delta smiled as she opened up her map and menu. So much to do and so little time. Delta tapped the tunnel button and in excitement, and it suddenly vanished. Delta blinked and the menu refused to reappear. The noise came from above. Delta followed the noise with her eyes and found herself on the first floor. "Ach, you! Got here before me, I make you!" Rudy growled at the young man with a large rifle in his hands. The man looked furious at Rudy's attempt at preventing him from going beyond the spider room. His weak beard and rounding face made Delta guess that he was younger than he wanted to appear. "Miss Darknessbane, please move. This place murdered my father. He was stolen from us, and the goblins murdered him. He deserves justice." The man snapped, and Rudy curled her lip. "Your daddy knew what this place was. He came in here after a pig. He knew what a dungeon was and what it could be. Your father was an idiot to come in here with a pistol. This dungeon only just woke up at the time and is still learning. It didn't command your dad to die." Rudy pushed the young man back gently, but even Delta could see how much effort it took the man to remain standing. Delta covered her mouth as the man began to cry. "Please! He was my dad. He was my dad. He didn't ask to die. He didn't ask for his pig to be stolen. I don't want him to be dead." The boy sobbed hard, and Rudy stared him down hard. "Delta would never have killed your father if she could prevent it. Dill, just turn around and get out of here," Rudy begged, and Dill raised his gun. "I'm going to shatter her core, and I'm going to make her regret killing my dad. Move," Dill ordered, tears running down his face. Rudy looked down, hair covering her eyes. Her voice was blank when she spoke. "I can't let you do that, Dill. Your mama needs you, and your little sisters need you. Go before Quiz sees you here and hears what you're saying." Rudy snapped, and her black hair began to move in some unseen wind. Dill sobbed harder, making much sense with his gibbering on. Delta fell to her knees, looking at the young man. "I'm so sorry," she choked, never able to forget the man who came in after a stolen pig. His death and fire crystal a boon, but his death a stain on Delta's soul. The warm wind blew through the entrance hall, and Rudy looked up, and Delta could see her eyes hard. "She's begging for forgiveness. Can you feel it?" Rudy asked softly, and Dill's gun wavered. He trailed off for a moment as he cried, the fire rifle in his hands looking so heavy that it might drop at any moment. "I'm so sorry. Please, I'm so sorry," Delta pleaded, and Dill just screamed as he fired off the ceiling in pain and anguish. Rudy let him, her hand on her knife going soft. Dill just kept screaming, "Don't say sorry, don't say sorry. I want my dad back. Give me my dad back," he screamed, and the fire crystal went dark after a few shots. Delta felt the bullets like a sudden toothache, so minor compared to the pain that Dill felt. Rudy moved, and Delta couldn't even see Dill slip into unconsciousness. His eyes slipped back, and Rudy's hand moved back from his neck. "Shh," she whispered, as Dill got go of the gun and it fell into Rudy's arms. The dark-skinned woman looked up at the ceiling where the bullets had made large holes. I know you would do better. Give him time. I'm begging, don't judge us or him because of this. He's just in pain." She called and cradled Dill like a child. Delta could only mumble more apologies. Rudy nodded as a warm wind hit her again, and it seemed like she was extra sensitive to it. "Yeah, you're too nice for your own good. Listen, I'm going to get Dill home. I'll be back soon." "I get it. I understand." Rudy smiled weakly as she began to move towards the entrance. "You're a dungeon, and people die, even with a nice dungeon like you. Don't take it personally," she said as she passed through the white barrier, but Delta was too numb to call after her. Delta did take it personally. She took it very personally. Dill. Delta would make it up to him. She didn't know how or how long, but Dill and his mother would never have to struggle again as long as Delta was herself. They deserved justice. Delta sobbed as the memory rushed over her. She had killed a man, and she had buried the memory under the progression and upgrades. The guilt had hit her hard, and Delta fled to her second floor where things felt more numb. It wasn't until the next day that she could gather herself and put her redemption into action. End of chapter. There is no epic lucha, only puns. Chapter 29, The Jungle Room. For the purchase of a manor, Delta made a new signboard as she felt the manor rise up to 24-hour period. It was time to stop moping and start doing something. It was slightly escapist of her to slip into a dungeon mindset. Delta let out a slide for a moment as she let the feeling drive her forward. The board above her tunnel was simple. To the farmer who raised ill, I am sorry. It was messy and held only 1% of the guilt that Delta felt, but it was all that she could do for the moment. She promised that she would do more in the future to make sure that Dill saw how bad she felt. Something to really show how she really felt towards death of people in her halls. Horrible and sad. Delta eyed the sign and nodded as she moved down the tunnel. It would take time and DP, and she didn't have for now. But she promised to make a proper memorial for the farmer soon. She didn't care what it took, nor did she care how long it set her back for. You did? No. Is my reason faulty? We will try to make an area for this man. I feel this is a thing you desire. New, alert me when something of a memory or memorial becomes unlocked. Delta ordered quietly. New dinged in compliance and faded. Delta inhaled and tried to gather her thoughts. There was so much to do and she really didn't have a clue where to begin. Her second floor and her first floor had much to improve to begin. For now she had mana to waste and Hobgob was sent out to gather more materials. It would keep her resources high and the DP department. With 53 mana and 20 DP, she didn't have tons of options. She decided to split the number between the floors for now. DP was the first and the mana for second. Delta moved to the second floor, where the only room was her new core room. The room which held her core before now became an empty, and Delta wondered what she could do with it. Standing in her core room, Delta opened the menu. Second floor menu. Create tunnel 10 mana. Create room 20 mana. Create main room 80 mana. This seems to be the main feature of the jungle floor theme. When purchased, you get a room several times larger than the normal ones, allowing for a massive amounts of space to decorate, place traps, and so on. Might make for a central hub area, a long great hall or an impressive entryway into the floor. Upgrades from first floor to be applied. Delta paced as she piloted, and her second floor only really had the mana cost for now. She quickly checked and found that no monsters could be placed or come near the stairs or traverse to the first floor. Delta could see the same white barrier that protected the main entry from when she tried to place a trap near or a monster. The main room was obviously interesting, but with the cost of 80, Delta could only hope that her cobs would bring back some decent haul. She needed at 27 mana to buy it, and that could make the small rooms for now and raise her max mana limit, but that also seemed to be a time-consuming issue, as buying 2 rooms would only give her 75 mana. With 12 mana regen, it would be terrible. Still, she wanted to get a move on to make good on her words to redeem herself, and her bigger goal, find the demon child. Knew there may be more methods for finding mana springs. She asked in a business-like tone that New appeared with a flash. Not that I can see. I feel that those able to sense mana in its basic form could help. Even Swa is more likely to sense fire element mana than basic. Perhaps Quiz. He seems to be able to use magic. Delta hummed as she paced. If she needed to wait until she had 80 mana, then Delta would simply ask Ruli for some tributes or Dio. They both seemed to be likely to help her if she simply asked. Ruli especially if Delta added more rare fish to her pond. Until then, Delta looked up at the simple iron staircase that kept her floors separate. She would do good where she could. First off, her first floor needed some upgrades. Ruli watched as an old woman pulled Dill into the house. The farm was beginning to look a little let go. Ruli opened a mint rock into her mouth and turned away to walk away. She closed her eyes and Tug pulled at her cloak. Miss Rudy, where's Daddy? The young girl's voice asked, and Rudy looked at the young girl, who held a rather ugly goblin doll. It was ironic, and Rudy didn't waste a thought on why that was. Sorry, little one, he ain't coming back, she said bluntly, and the girl's face puffed up in anger. Mama said liars are bad. The girl accused, and Rudy couldn't even feel the kick aimed at her shins. Rudy let it happen. It was good for people to let the steam off. Rudy should know. The girl ran back to the house, throwing the goblin doll into the muddy puddle and tears leaking from her eyes. Rudy walked over and picked it up. The doll had already absorbed too much muddied water that to be held, but Rudy walked back to the front door and placed it against the door for when the girl needed it again. It felt familiar. I hate you. He said he'd be back tonight. Too familiar. Rudy sniffed and walked down the path back to Durrance, where she could grab a pint and make a fool of herself where her mother could see her. Mila Josie Wolfbane deserved the shame. Rudy looked at her mud-streaked hand and decided that the girl would appreciate the truth down the line. Chris would have known what to say to get the truth across and not get kicked. Chris was an ass, but he was a smart ass. He could say one thing and mean another 3 things at the same time. People trusted him because he had an air about him that reeked of a reluctant helper, a quirk that refused to die in some heroes. Rudy didn't have that. She didn't have that at all. The girl's tears meant nothing. It was just a sign of pain, a fact that her child had lost her parent. It was a fact that Rudy raised to accept facts. Get a grip, you're brainwashed by that old cow. Rudy stopped in the exit of the farm and grabbed the gate with one hand. It cracked under her strength, and she forced herself to remain calm. Shut up, I am not, she muttered, in a weak defense. Emotions were weapons, and if they weren't, they were hindrances. Rudy had been taught that, and she had embraced it when everything had gone wrong. Then stupid Quiz had come along, and everything had gone wrong. Rudy sighed and walked back down the path. She would be back tomorrow to fix the gate. It had been an old promise to herself that she fixed what she had broken. Sadly, Rudy had gone the wrong way that day and couldn't have stopped Dill and the girl's father from entering the dungeon in her usual hunting spot. It wasn't her fault, but Rudy accepted the blame when the children had no one else to blame. It really sucked to have nothing to blame but a dungeon, but it just led to more pain. Oi, are you going to beat up more people? And don't make me remove you from the town again. Quiz shouted, and Rudy blinked. Her old mind snapped due to the question, and she couldn't help but grin. The only thing I aim to beat is your backside in a drinking game, Rudy corrected, and Quiz snorted as he moved to walk in line with her. Sure, you and what stomach? I beat you in the last 5 rounds. Besides, can't drink. Too many people wanting to explore the dungeon. Already sent Dio back 3 times. Quiz grunted, and Rudy smoked. Kid's got balls to ignore you, she admitted, and Quiz snorted as he moved to the bush along with his leg. Urging it back into Mrs. Dabagost's garden, it wiggled in nervousness, and Quiz checked to see if Haldy had locked it up for the night. The man often forgot to keep the cheese magic secure when he slept. It was a rather odd sight to see Von the baker suck the dairy out of the local cheese chimera. Quiz said something about her carefree attitude, and Rudy basked in the open challenge. It was so honest and clear. It didn't lead to pain or questions. I bet I can spot more teens than you, she bragged, and Quiz smirked and then turned his usual pissy face on. I hardly take fool's bets, but you can make it too easy. He mocked and kicked a tree where the girl fell out with a yelp. Rudy had to admit, when it came to ruining fun, Quiz was the master. Her mudroom had been upgraded to allow her traps to respawn whenever the dungeon was empty of outsiders. The tripwire in the air had a random stick and trap on it one end of the log platforms. It left her with 10 DP to mess with. Delta watched as the gobs jumped on the log with the trap on it and didn't activate it. A useful built-in feature. It didn't seem to work when she designed a complication with her room construction, such as the mud or the thin platforms. Mr. Mushy, what do you suggest I do next? She asked the giant mushroom man. It peered upwards in response to her voice. It slowly raised its thumbs up, and Delta beamed. Thank you for your advice. I will do exactly that. She half-joked as it went back to chasing Bori around the grove. The mushroom man enjoyed petting the animal far too much, and it was better than the greater Mushy, who looked like it just wanted to eat everything. Hob and Gob returned, bickering over who had the largest haul. Delta moved to them with a smile as they dumped the same things onto the floor. Their wooden armor cracked, and Delta found the equipment cute in a way. Delta watched as her mana easily hit 85. Delta blinked and looked down at the only unique item amongst the mushrooms and water. It was a rabbit, but its fur wasn't the usual grey or white. It was red. The rabbit looked to be in some pain, as it looked like it had lost a fight with some animal. Hob clubbed it over the head, and Delta making a wince. Blood hair absorbed. Critter unlocked. Blood hair. Blood hair. The fast rabbit sheds its coat 10 times a year. No one knows why, but the coat does have some toughness to it. The coat grows deeper red the closer to the end of the year it is. It also tastes rather good. Delta blinked at the offering, and as her mana dropped to 84, she rushed to the second floor, yelling thanks to the gobs, who looked pleased and nudged each other in a pleased motion. Delta would be lost without them, and reminded herself to upgrade them with a slingshot soon. It was only fitting to have some birds for her jungle would be so bad. Some ridiculous dancing bird that moved backwards would be brilliant, and Delta grinned as she purchased a main room and built it just off a core room. Main room purchased plus 10 max mana. This room will naturally grow plants and trees purchased for it. The jungle room cannot be upgraded to a special room and will remain a jungle room. I suggest building off of the size from hidden rooms and challenge rooms if you wish, or build another room in the north for a better core room. Delta nodded, and the room came with its own entrance door. Delta admired the leap-style metal and root sculpted wood. Delta moved past it and saw the huge room before her. It was like a giant wall of mist that turned transparent as Delta looked at it. She could see the far walls covered in wooden trees. Delta ran forward and continued. It took her roughly 3 minutes at full sprinting speed to reach the far side, and Delta turned with a laugh as she pumped her fist into the air. Welcome to Delta's paradise in the mist. Please do not annoy the frogs. Delta called at the empty mist and opened a menu to observe the upgrades of the room. Oh, this could be fun. Delta looked at her options and saw that she had quite a few plants to begin her reign as a peaceful terror. Sending her gobs out again with a respectful tone, Delta wondered what the silver leaf and wine plant would do in this jungle. Delta could hardly wait and to see what had turned out in a few days. She tried to cackle and just sounded joyful. End of chapter. There is no epic lucha, only puns. Chapter 30. A Gentleman. Mr. Mushy flexed a thumb. It was a funny thing, a thumb. Without one, he could not grab things with his hands. Being a mushroom meant that he didn't really have to grab things. He was a mushroom, he was fine. But now that he'd grown these legs, funny things those are, and he couldn't bear the idea of going back, sitting in one spot until his cap grew wrinkled and his mind returned to the earth. His best brother, Great Mushy, disagreed strongly on this matter. Mr. Mushy nodded, understanding how his brother's thorny vines and dangerous spit made moving a little less tempting. So Mr. decided that he would just tell his best brother everything that happened near the front of their home. Mother Delta moved past, her unseen form, but her voice loud and cheerful. Mr. Mushy wiggled from his funny thumb in the direction of her voice vanished down. And Mother Delta had been busy. A second floor? He wondered what it was like. Mr. Mushy used his wonderful fingers to itch his cap in curiosity. It was a being on the first floor. He should not be thinking of other floors, but the thought stuck to him like a gut-rot mushroom spores did when he sat on them. He found them funny, but the little goblins ran away, covering their noses at his approach. He tried the other mushrooms, poking them until spores came out, and he rubbed them on his body. Hands were very useful for poking. Vines where his brothers could only ensnare or choke. Maybe pull if brother was feeling nice. Mister tried not to feel too prideful of his hands and feet. It was so odd when he saw the little mans, and was more excited to touch them than hurt them. He did not remember everything from his time as a mushy. Things had gotten lost and the world became bigger. But he remembered the hate, the desire to kill, the desire to hurt any that came near. It was a sickly feeling like a sweet flower of water. So easy to drink, but hard to stop drinking. Then Mother Delta had taken that hate away and given him fingers. And for each finger he had, the hate had become quieter. Mister didn't miss it. He enjoyed chasing Bori and cuddling the hairy thing. He enjoyed falling into the mudroom and splashing about. He liked when Mother Delta was happy. Mr. Mushy carefully moved across the mudroom. It took some luck, aiming and failing, but he managed to reach the far end. Mr. lumbered down the room and waved at the nice spiders. Not like the one that had to smash. One wave back before it continued its webbing and weaving. Mr. tried to think of what would be like to make a web with your fingers or hands. He'd be some rare monster. Spider mushroom, the mushroom that swung through the dungeon on huge things. Yeah, that image pleased him greatly. He waddled into the pond room and waved at Wattles. The duck stared at him and then nodded once before it went back to swimming lazily around the pond. Mr. wondered what it would be like to be in the water. He knew water was good. He was a mushroom. Water was pretty good. He did wonder if being in it too much would be bad. It was a thought that he would poke in later, and he waved goodbye to the fishies and made his way down the tunnel to the new room that he hadn't seen yet. The little ones called it a storeroom, and he did not know what that meant. As a mushy, he had no need to store or wondered, with his wonderful hands, if he needed one now. It was worth a look, and he did love looking. The room was nice. It felt like Mr. had walked into some well-moistened room. The air seemed to hold a nice crispness to it. Mr. saw wooden things that looked like flat, and he held rocks and arrows in neat lines. He wondered what they were. Shelves. They are good for a space for holding objects for viewing pleasure. Mr. Mushy, do not wander too far from the grove. Delta does not need to fish you out of the mudroom again. Mr. nodded happily. New was a nice thing. A menu, if Mr. remembered right. He appeared not long ago, after the nice plant woman had come. Mr. Mushy wondered if new was a shelf. He held the words in a neat row, and Mr. viewing pleasure. I am a menu, not a piece of furniture. See, there is a shelf, a barrel, a chest. Ah, I think that is a pot, but Delta's crafting is making me hesitant to relate the two. Mr. Mushy went still to the spot and sat there. It was odd, heavily lopsided, and looping handles looking like worms. The wide base slightly dented on the one side. Mother Delta made this. It was made by her fingers. It was glorious. Mr. picked it up, and a few round pieces of metal clinked inside. He turned it around and around in his hands, and the thing was mud. Yes, he had played with enough of it to know the feeling. This was not wet mud, but firm mud. How did Mother do that? Delta created it as such. She really didn't do anything but cause a travesty to the pottery world. Normally one would use fire to heat the mud and... New went on, but Mr. had stood. His mind was not clever like New, or smart like Swa's. His mind was simple. He saw something, he hugged it. He got curious, he went to look. When Mr. got interested in something, he went to play with it. This was true now. He turned and lumbered back down the hall. He needed mud. He needed his fingers, and he needed a thing that he was afraid of. Fire. For fire, he would either need to use the bright torches on the wall, or he needed Swa. Swa liked fire, fire liked Swa. Mr. Wushy wondered if Swa could make fire that did not burn him and his cap, and maybe make the fire help him. Mother Delta made some fire on wood and fire in goblins, heat in Bori. Fire could maybe not be bad, just angry. Mr. didn't like the idea of being near fire, but he liked the idea of a pot made with fingers and hands and ideas. Mr. decided, like the mudroom, that the only way to go forward was to take one step at a time. He simply tried, and then things would be fine. Mother Delta had shown him that, and she did not kill, yet she was a dungeon. It was something that made Delta part inside of himself, struggle, kill, grow, lure, kill. It was very simple, like a mushroom growing. One did the right things and mushrooms appeared. Mother Delta did not do the right things, yet good things kept happening. She grew mushrooms in fire. They did not burn, but grew. It scared him. It delighted him. It made him feel alive. Mr. Mushy jumped with glee into the mudroom and began to gather mud. It did not want to be gathered, and Mr. decided that it was a much better idea that would bring Swa to the mudroom, and he clapped his hands with joy and clambered out with some help from Bori, who came at his prompting. The boar seemed annoyed, but did not snort like the usual in anger when he patted its fun, hairy belly. I cannot wait to see how wrong this will go. At least you're amusing. I admit that much. You were so nice. Mr. clapped his hands in some odd song as he'd made up, and he called it Bernie Hot Burn, Don't Hurt, Make Me Pot, Thank You. Oh, good. You inherited Delta's creative talents. First the pot, now the songwriting mushroom. What next? Drake writes a novel, the great Mushy plays a piano. He did not know what those things were. You should tell Mr. about them, please. I was merely just... You cannot seriously wish to know... Of course you do. A piano is a music instrument that requires... Mr. listened with joy as he learned. He liked learning. He liked being Mr. He hoped that he could be a better Mr. soon. What came next? That many people buy or purchase to keep on some dusty bookshelves after a few years. There, I have now explained both items. You really have another question. A gentleman usually is a greater male in term of the simple Mr. Either that or a Sir, but Fran has obviously shown that title has very little grace to it. Gentleman. Mr. inhaled through his pores, and the word seemed to be so grand and so powerful that he nearly forgot about making his pot. He trembled at the word and repeated it over and over. A gentleman, the refined Mr., the graceful Sir. Mr. poked Soir in the camp and dreamed of the word as the goblin growled at him. He gestured what he desired, and Soir seemed to be brightening up when he guessed that Mr. wanted him to use fire on something. The little one loved fire. Now Mr. understood that feeling. He loved the idea of a gentleman. He would really like to be one. I shall, make note of that. Would you like a top hat and a monocle as well? Wait. No, that was just a sarcastic top hat. Monocle. Were these the elite-equipped items of a gentleman? Mr. put his hands on his face and with surprise felt a green liquid that coursed through his spongy body gather in his cheeks. They felt warm, and Mr. danced on the spot as he asked Soir to draw him a top hat in the dirt. Soir scratched his head, but New seemed to speak to him. Soir used his staff and to make a single line in a large box that sat on top of it. It was a hat, and it was a square hat, and it was glorious. Delta paused. She felt something. She giggled in surprise at the light fluttering moving through her body. The excitement of the second floor must be getting to her. She grinned as her gobs would soon return, or maybe rudely. She would try to keep her second floor off limits until she made it spectacular. Delta really hoped Mrs. Davergast would return. Delta suddenly found herself in need of some very firm plants. End of chapter. That, my friends, concludes this episode. I hope that you enjoyed. If you wish to support the author of the story, there will be a link below. If you wish to support this channel, there are multiple ways to do so, which will all also be linked below. But the easiest way would be to subscribe and share my videos as much as possible. And until next time, I hope you all have a good one. And I'll see you all in the next video. Cheers.